Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today I will be talking about the 5 most common mistakes for the Feudal Age and how you can improve on them. So, I won't leave you waiting any longer, let's just jump right into it. The first thing I want to talk about is understanding tempo in AoE 4. Tempo is really important because it determines who has the initiative in the game, who is in control. Are you the one that's reacting, or are you forcing your opponent to reacting? And are you adapting as well? And so, it's closely aligned to the concept of momentum as well. And so momentum doesn't just mean you're playing fast. It also means you're making the right decisions, the smart decisions, and you're making the game swing in your favor. So in this game, I went double scout, and so I have a lot of sheep here. This is about 10 minutes into the game, 8.5 minutes. And so I've already slaughtered a couple of these sheep, but I also have another additional 4. I know my opponent has no sheep, and even though he's playing a non-sheep dependent civ, just the fact that I have this many sheep is a lot of extra food that is safe for me. That's already an advantage I got from going an instant to scout. I also went double TC, and I was able to do so really quickly because I had a special resource spawn here where the wood and stone was closely aligned, and so I saved 100 resources on not making drop-off points for these two resources. And so the stone and the wood could drop off at the Aachen Chapel, which inspired the resources, the gathering of the resources, and so that gave me a very fast timing on my second TC. I put it on the boar, that gives me a very fast gathering rate, and then I can start adapting to my opponent. In this game, we have a lot of back and forth here in the beginning. I make a lot of production buildings very early on, go for upgrades, and then I end up taking fights that matter. And so right now I'm constantly poking to my opponent, forcing him to make archers, and then I'm going to add a couple of more stables. And so think of the fights. Are you taking fights just to fight? Are you taking fights actually to do something? Could it be harassing villagers? Could it be defending your own villagers? Maybe you are securing certain resource deposits. And so it's really important to think of that when you are fighting, because you can quickly lose the tempo if you take a bad fight. So, the numbers here are almost equal, but we're playing counters. And so, currently I'm the one who has the tempo, because I'm countering his warrior scouts, and I'm also countering his archers. And his warrior scouts doesn't really counter any of these. Warrior scouts are great for harassing, because they have a great healing. And so now I've really forced defensive play from him, whilst I have my 2 TC. And so if you take a look at the top of the screen, he has 38 villagers, I have 55. I've not done any harassing at this point. I've added another TC, and that gives me an eco advantage. But we're still just fighting to fight. And so you might ask, how does that make sense compared to what I said before? Well, it makes sense because the longer the Feudal Age goes on for me, the better. Because if he doesn't add another TC, then I'm constantly gaining a larger advantage because of my eco advantage. Later on in this game, my opponent decides to go for a Castle Age. That's the 1800 resources that he's spending merely on getting a tech advantage, but that doesn't instantly give him a certain type of unit that would beat me having a lot of units as well, since I didn't go for a fast castle. I have a 40 eco lead about 15 minutes into the game, 16 minutes into the game, and so the moment he ages up, I know this guy doesn't have a lot of units, because I've spent the same amount of resources and more on just producing, whereas he went for a tech up. That doesn't really give him anything instantly. And so I can take a really good fight with the tempo advantage that I have, because I have more units, I've spent them on being aggressive instead of going for a tech advantage. Even though I could have gone for my own tech, the fact that I have this many units as well, and I'm able to harass and kill a lot of villagers or take this fight here that wins me the game, that just goes to show you how important tempo is. And so it wins you games if you make the correct decisions. The second thing I want to talk about when it comes to the 5 most common mistakes that people make in the Feudal Age is not going for pocket resources in your games. So you might be playing a civilization that relies a lot on farms, such as the English. Gives you a high amount of food, but it also takes a lot of wood to make those farms. And so you might say, oh, they're cheaper as English. Sure. But it also takes a lot of time to set up, and you could spend those resources more wisely. Going for pocket resources is a cheap way to get a lot of food almost instantly. You drop off a mill here, and then you can get the high gathering rate deer. You can also drop your TCs, your additional TCs, on deers as well. And it's a very common strategy that you can use to gain a lot of food really quickly, instead of having to go farms really early on in the game, which often will lose you the games that you're playing. And this brings me to map control. So if you want to go for what we call pocket resources, you require map control. In this game here, I know my opponent is playing very defensively. He's going to go 3 TC, so double TC in Feudal, and then Castle Age, he's going to go for the 3rd TC. He's playing English, and he's not gone for this deer camp, and he's not gone for this deer camp. I know that he's making a lot of farms, which means I can very confidently go out on the map and get the resources that I want to. For the food gathering rates in AoE 4, it's important to note which ones are the most effective, so that when you are choosing what resources to go for, that you choose the right one. So the boar is obviously the most effective land resource, then it's deer, and then it's farms, sheep, and then berries. So berries is the slowest one, and it sits at around 0.66 food per second. Then we have the deer, and that sits at 8.25. We have farms that are at 7.5, and sheep that are also at 7.5. The boar sits at 9, and then we have the shoreline fishing. The shoreline fishing for villagers is the most quick one that you can go for. So it sits at 1 food per second, but the thing that's really important to notice as well is that if you have a fishing boat gathering from shoreline fish, then the fishing boat gathers at the same rate as berries do for villagers, so it's very slow. If you put your fishing boat, however, on the deep water fish, then it's really, really fast as well, sitting at 0.9, which is the same as the boar. So if you're on water, always go for the deep sea fish, deep water fish, instead of the shoreline fish. If you have villages close to water, go for shoreline fish with those. Otherwise, then you should be going for the boar, then the deer, then farms and berries. Of course, you can use your sheep, as they are a safe food resource, and it's important that you don't have too much walk time in the early part of the game, and you have to take that into consideration as well whenever you are going for pocket resources, as it does take time for you to travel to those resources. The third most common mistake people make in the Feudal Age is not raiding. It's really important that when you raid, then you go for villagers and that you don't take stupid fights like we talked about before. The earlier you raid, the higher the chance is that your opponent is going to be thrown off by those raids. And so if you're playing, for example, the 2TC Abbasid control build, which I will link in the description as well, then you can very quickly get out a couple of archers, a couple of spears, maybe you drop a stable as well, run a 3-piece unit comp here, and then quickly go and exploit your opponent's resources. They will have villagers there, and the idle time is really important, because when we talk about idling villagers, it can often have the same effect as actually killing villagers, because the longer those villagers don't work, well, for a larger amount of time, they're going to remain irrelevant, because villagers that are not working are not giving the opponent any resources. And so it's exactly the same as killing them if you idle them in a TC for a long time. I'm going around my opponent's base here. This is an early raid, and I'm looking for the villagers. I've spotted he's gone for a second TC. That's a safe gold for him now. But I know he has 2 berry patches up here. He has the deer, and then he has his gold and an open woodline here. My opponent made the mistake of going for his second woodline, which is not in the town center's vicinity. And so you can very quickly exploit that by taking 1 horseman and then push all of those villagers off without making a large amount of army or anything like that. And so he scouts the horseman, comes, he moves the villagers. Those villagers that are traveling right now are not gathering resources, but all of your own villagers are. And so you're already getting an advantage that way. It is important to go for textiles if you're being raided, and even more important, when you're raiding, don't overcommit. Commit until it doesn't make sense. And so make a few horsemen, but I would not make 10 horsemen right here to cancel out a woodline. I'm already doing that with 2. These guys up here will be patrolling between the berries, the deer, and then I'll go and check out the bottom every now and then, and so will my scout, of course. Really important that when you're raiding, don't lose all your units. Go away if you've forced units from your opponent, because that's kind of a win as well. And then you can dictate the game from there on out, i.e. tempo, as we talked about before. The fourth most common mistake people make in the Feudal Age is not really understanding the playstyle triangle, which is turtle, boom, and aggression. Aggression is playing aggressive, boom is going for multiple town centers or trade to get an eco advantage, and turtle is playing very defensively. And so aggression will beat boom, boom will beat turtle, and turtle will beat aggression. In this game here, I'm playing against the French as the HRE. The French player here is being very aggressive, and he's forced me to turtle. I'm playing very defensively. I've gotten a couple of outposts up here. I've gathered stone for the upgrades for the outpost, whereas I'm going for the Castle Age. The guy here has gone for second TC. It's a really smart play from him to go for second TC because it'll yield him an eco advantage in the later game, and since he's playing the French, his French knights will actually be able to beat my man-at-arms. So all he has to do is last this game, play aggressive, and force me to play very defensively, i.e. turtle, and then he can secretly boom in the back. And so once you understand this principle of the playstyle triangle, then you can use that to your advantage and not stick a hard stick to certain playstyles. It's really important when you're playing UE4 that you might have a build order, and that's a good thing, but you don't hard stick to the build order. So if you're playing HRE, you don't always go fast castle because it's the best thing to go for. It might not be. And so add another town center. Maybe go for a fast imperial if you're feeling frisky, right? And so think of these things when you're playing UE4. The fifth most common mistake people make in AoE 4, and I'm gonna probably think of this as more of a general thing rather than a Feudal Age specific thing, is poor resource management. And so it's important when you play AoE 4 that you understand how should I distribute my villagers. I'm gonna need a lot on food and gold if I'm gonna make food and gold specific units. I'm gonna need a lot on food and a little bit on wood if I'm gonna make trash units, i.e. wood and food units. Maybe I want to go for a lot of farms. I'm going to need a lot of villages on wood. If I'm going to make a lot of units, but I don't have the production buildings, I'm going to have to first off put a lot of villages on wood to get, maybe in this game, more stables. And then I'll switch over to food and gold once I have the stables. Always keep a couple of units on wood so you can make houses or towers or add in more barracks or other production buildings later on in the game without having to constantly switch around 10 villages from each resource. But if you need to make a lot of units really quickly, don't be afraid to take a lot of villages and put them on another resource. You might get travel time, but if you plan ahead and know what sort of strategy that you're going to go for in the game, then that will not be a problem for you, because the better your decisions are, and so you have less walking time, then the more flexibility that then you can have. The last thing I want to recommend yet again is the AoE 4 production calculator. It is an online tool that you can use to get a hang on how you should distribute villages for constant unit production. If you have a Burgrave palace, it's going to require a lot on food. Over 30 villages are required to produce constant men-at-arms from a Burgrave, and not too much on gold, and if you have relics as well as the HRE, then even less. It's very important that when you are going for units, that you get the high gathering resources that we talked about before. That would be deer and boar, and then you use that to your advantage. So secure those pocket resources, get the high gathering rates so that you need less villages on food, for example, and then you can produce units accordingly. Use that tool and use it in game as well. Take a quick look at how much do I need to make constant knights for 2 stables. Okay, I need this many, and then you can optimize from there on out. Plan ahead, use the AoE4 production calculator, and think of strategies on what you're going to do. Then you would be able to have better resource management. Also, don't forget about feudal techs. The early feudal techs that you get are not expensive. They used to be, but they are no longer. Get those, they pay off really quickly. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, or you have questions, let me know in the comment section down below. If you want to check out more of my games or just want to come and have a chit chat, check out my Twitch channel where I stream very regularly every weekend, and from June on onwards I'm going to be streaming in the weekdays as well. So I'll catch you there and have a good time. See ya.